Growing up, I was an only child, and as a result, my parents were fiercely protective. Up until I was 12 in 2010, they insisted on having a babysitter whenever they went out, even for short trips. This pattern might have continued if not for James, the last babysitter I ever had. He was an 18-year-old kid who lived a few blocks away. Looking back now, I can see him for what he was, an awkward, silent, and deeply unsettling young man who seemed to have a serious lack of understanding about personal space. This was only the second time he had watched me overnight. I was curled up on the couch in the living room, completely absorbed in my favorite TV show. The house was quiet, and the only light came from the glow of the television. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw James come downstairs from the guest room. He didn't say a word. He just walked over to the couch, sat down directly behind me, and became perfectly still. After a few minutes, the silence became so thick that I couldn't ignore it. I slowly turned around to look at him. He was just sitting there, staring at the back of my head. It was weird, but in the innocence of being 12, I didn't find it creepy, just odd. I laughed a little, a nervous, shy sound. He broke the silence. "Do you want to play a video game?" he asked. I wasn't really a gamer, but I was so relieved he'd finally spoken that I said yes. He went upstairs and came back with my dad's Xbox 360. I was a bit confused. How did he even know it was in my dad's room? I didn't question it. Maybe my dad had told him. He set up the console and put on what I think was Halo 2. It was clear right away that I was no match for him. He killed me at least 10 times in a row without a word. Then, he stood up. He told me he was going to show me how to play better. He came over to my side of the couch and grabbed both of my hands, which were holding the controller. He was standing so close that his body was leaning against mine. He tried to mimic the controls, but his hands holding mine felt so wrong. I was so uncomfortable that I felt a lump in my throat. I couldn't take it anymore. I gently pulled my hands away and said, "I don't like this game. I want to stop." He looked visibly upset for a moment, but he just said, "Okay," and sat back down, continuing to play by himself. I took that as my cue to go upstairs. I went to my room to watch TV, and at some point I fell asleep. I don't know how long I was asleep, but I woke up to the glaring light of the TV. My room was pitch dark except for the screen. As soon as I sat up, the springs of my mattress made a crunching noise. But underneath that sound, I heard a distinct shuffle coming from somewhere in my room. My heart leaped into my throat. I wanted to call for James, but I was so scared that I was afraid to make a sound. I just sat there, my eyes darting around the room. My gaze stopped on the closet door, which was half open. I squinted to see better. A white screen suddenly flashed on the TV, giving off enough light to illuminate the closet. In that brief moment, I saw him. James was standing in my closet. A noticeable gasp escaped my lips. He must have heard it because he slowly came out, his hands held out in front of him. "Shit's okay," he whispered. I sat there, frozen in fear, as he came closer. He started telling me how pretty I was. I knew what he was doing. When I saw an opportunity, a small window of space between him and the door, I took it. I slipped past him and sprinted downstairs to the office, which had a lock. I grabbed the phone on the desk and called my dad. James knocked on the door, his voice strained and pleading. He begged me not to call my dad, saying he wasn't going to do anything. My dad, of course, was furious on the phone. He told me to stay where I was and that he'd be home in an hour. By the time my parents got home, James was gone, but it didn't matter. They had his parents' information, and they called the police. I explained what had happened, and James was eventually arrested on charges of sexual misconduct. From that day on, I was trusted to be alone without a babysitter, and it's strange, but I still think about James at least once a day. It was a cold Friday night, the kind that makes you want to curl up under a blanket with a movie. Instead, I was babysitting for the Millers, a family that lived in a huge, old house with a basement that gave me the creeps. My childhood fear of basements had lessened over the years, but I still got a slight flutter of dread in my stomach whenever I was alone in a house, and this one was no exception. The two kids, 8-year-old Lily and her older brother, were already asleep upstairs. I had my headphones on, deep into a game of Fortnite on the big screen in the Millers' finished basement, when I heard a faint thunk from somewhere behind me. It was barely audible over the loud sound effects, but I knew I had heard something. I took off my headphones and glanced toward the back of the basement. The area was a chaotic mess of old furniture and boxes, and it would require a thorough search to find the source of the noise. I figured it was nothing, Probably just a pipe settling or an old piece of furniture creaking. I tried to go back to my game, but my full focus was gone. I was too paranoid. I took off the headset and continued playing with the sound off. A few minutes later, there was a sudden, sharp clank with a metallic, echoing ring. This was not a random house sound. This was an intentional noise made by someone or something. My heart pounded as I turned off the system. I stood up and walked, very slowly, toward the back of the basement. I laid eyes on a big metal air vent in the corner of the room, and that's when it hit me. The sound had come from there. I got as close as I felt comfortable and stopped, staring at the vent. A terrible, painful knot formed in my stomach, and I felt like the life was being drained out of me when a human hand, reached out from the air vent and started waving at me. A deep, raspy voice said, "Come here. I need help." I didn't run. I just gradually stepped backward, my mouth hanging open, my eyes wide with terror. The hand gripped the vent and started shaking it aggressively, obviously trying to break it open. I screamed, "I'm calling the cops!" But the shaking didn't stop. I sprinted up the stairs, my mind racing. My first thought wasn't for myself, it was for the kids. I flew up the stairs and into Lily's bedroom. She was fast asleep. I quickly but gently shook her awake. "Lily, come on, we have to go, right now!" I whispered. She was disoriented and scared, but she followed my lead. We ran up the next flight of stairs and found a room with a lock, barricading ourselves inside. I told Lily to hide in the closet while I looked for something, anything, for a weapon. My heart was in my throat when I heard a crash from downstairs and a maniacal scream echoing through the house. "Where are you? I'm gonna kill you!" he bellowed. He ran up the stairs, taking two at a time. I heard him try the doorknob to the room we were in and then start pounding on the door so hard that I could see it bowing inward. I grabbed Lily from the closet and we quietly climbed out the window. We jumped into the bushes below, landing just as a police car pulled up in front of the house. We basically ran into the officers' arms, begging them to go inside and get the man. They told us to wait in the police car, which they locked, while they both went inside with their guns drawn. Not even 5 minutes later, the two officers came out, holding the man in cuffs. He took my place in the back seat of the car, and for that moment until the police drove away, he was giving me the most evil, hate-filled stare I had ever seen. That stare still haunts me to this day. Growing up, my little brother, T, and I always had a babysitter during the week and sometimes on the weekends because our parents both worked full-time. I was about 10 years old when my little brother and I needed a babysitter on a Saturday night. My dad was working the night shift, and my mom was in Italy. My dad didn't have anyone to watch us, and that's when a man named Keith, who my dad knew from work, volunteered. My dad didn't know Keith well, but he seemed like a nice enough guy. My dad walked us to Keith's front door at 6 p.m. It was already dark out. Keith seemed super friendly, maybe even a little too friendly. He was always smiling, no matter what he said. He and my dad talked for a while before my dad left. Keith showed us around the house, which was nice. T and I sat on the couch in the living room. I was excited to see a GameCube, and I immediately started to hook it up. Keith stood by the doorway with a big smile on his face, watching me. He then told T to come with him, saying he had some games and toys for him upstairs. I was so absorbed in my game that I didn't think twice about it. They were up there for a while, and eventually I got bored. I left the GameCube on and went upstairs to see what they were doing. The upstairs was pretty big, with a wide hallway and a bunch of open doors, but there was one closed door. I figured they must be in there, so I opened the door. The room was dark, lit only by a computer screen. I walked over to the computer and saw two camera screens on it. One was of an empty room with a lamp on, and the other was of T and Keith sitting on the floor playing with toys. I watched for a little bit and grew uncomfortable as I saw Keith inappropriately touching T's shoulder, rubbing it really slowly. Then, Keith stopped moving and just looked at my brother with a strange smile. I could see Keith's mouth moving, but I couldn't hear what he was saying. I clicked around on the screen to see if I could zoom in, and the scroller on the mouse actually did zoom the screen in. Keith's smile vanished, and he looked up at the camera with terrifyingly wide eyes. I felt like he was looking at me. I hurriedly left the room and shut the door. I walked down the hall and called T's name. Keith came storming out of the room down the hall and looked at me with a face a hell of a lot creepier than a smile. He asked in a firm, deep voice if I had been in his room. My heart was racing as I said no, but I could hear the shake in my voice. He stormed down the hall and opened his bedroom door with a certain aggression. I ran to the room T was in and told him we had to leave. He responded by saying, "He's creepy." That was the icing on the cake. I grabbed him by the arm and we ran. As we were heading down the stairs, we heard Keith scream, "Yes, you did!" from his bedroom. Then he screamed that I went through his closet too, which I did not. We ran out the front door and down the sidewalk until we couldn't see his house anymore. I asked T if Keith had touched him anywhere besides his shoulder, and he just shrugged. I was afraid to think about what that meant. We were luckily near a friend's house, so we rang the bell and asked my friend's mom to use their phone. I called my dad and told him the situation. My friend's mom ended up letting us stay there for the night. My dad called the cops and reported Keith, and he was able to get him fired. Nothing happened to Keith legally, but I still believe he was a dangerous man. I still don't know what to make of what I saw on that computer screen.